Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of stories affecting the Sikh community around the world. And in Canada, we look at the story of the Sikh falsely accused by India of throwing a grenade at the Indian High Commission and the impact that's had on his life. And after a hugely successful referendum turnout, Hindutva, now on the back foot, are trying very hard to claw back some control of the narrative in the propaganda war. Well, we'll take a look at some of their increasingly desperate attempts at doing that. All that and more on today's show, but joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Some exciting news coming up. Yes, it looks like we will be going live starting in January. We will go live, and we want you to be a part of it. We'll have a call-in line and WhatsApp line, so you can call in from anywhere in the world as we are live to discuss the conversation as well. Of course, we will continue with our comments and our feedback section at the end of the show. But the beautiful thing is that throughout the show, you will be able to call in and have the conversation with us. So that's exciting news. Watch for that coming in January, and we will keep pushing it to keep reminding you. Other than that, thanks again for joining us for another episode. Stick around at the end to see what comments made the grade. And with that, we'll send it back to you in England there, Angus.
Indeed, and what fun that's going to be. We do look forward to that. But in the meantime, James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And as usual, we'll take a look at loads of your great comments at the end of the show, so do stay tuned for that. Right, James, loads as always to get through today. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
As we always do, and the audience will be able to watch us live as we fumble through our technical and our speaking. But in terms of live and speaking, we are turning to take a look at Sukh Dhaliwal. He is a Canadian MP, and we've covered him before because he's been at many events that I've covered throughout British Columbia. And of course, he is a first generation from India that really his English is not too great. And with that said, I must say that I really like Sukh because he is one who gets out in the community, he gets involved, and he is very much a leader in a lot of ways to help better the future of Canada. However, with the speech that he recently made, and that was in the Parliament talking about the 350th anniversary of Sikh Guru Tegh Bahadur's martyrdom, and people were upset about his English. And again, I understand that his English is not very well spoken. It's hard to understand at times. But I really like him because he doesn't matter, he doesn't care about that. What he cares about is being a part of the community and being a national leader. He has helped pass bills, he's helped with numerous different acts that have made lives for Canadians better, but he also is steadfast in his support of new Canadians to have opportunities such as himself to get all the way up as an MP in the Parliament and not be held back by his language barrier. When I've seen him speak, sometimes he does bring an interpreter or someone to speak on his behalf, and to me that is great because even with his broken English, he still makes a lot more sense than most politicians I listen to, especially when you look at the people complaining are probably just too used to bumper sticker slogans that they hear out of Pierre Poilievre, and anything more articulate than that confuses them. So I just say, you know what, if language is the biggest issue that you're going to complain about, well, maybe it's time to do some soul searching and realize that he has come to Canada. He built a business, he's built a reputation, and he's built himself a solid following as an MP representing our city of Surrey. Now, as this goes on, it's not a new debate. People have been complaining about different things at different times, and they'll complain that a English-speaking politician is very lousy when it comes to speaking French or doesn't speak French at all. And, you know, it's always something about language within our parliament. But I think that what they are overlooking is the fact that, as I said, it shows how far a first-generation Canadian can get within our system, within our politics, within business, within education, within any type of area of being Canadian, because Canada is a melting pot of all different nationalities, and people come here to live a dream, to acquire the skills and the ability to move forward with life. And I think that Sikh Dhaliwal stands as a true testament as to how you can succeed coming to Canada. And of course, these are the same people that complain about people coming to Canada and not working, not contributing, not being a part of society. And then they turn around, they complain when people are working. Oh, they're taking our jobs. Then they complain, oh, well, now he's in Parliament representing us and doing great things for our nation. But let's find something to pick on here. And I think that's the part of society that is really dragging things down, is the lack of supporting people that are brave enough to get into politics. Because let's face it, it is a thankless job. No matter where you're from, no matter what you do, you're going to have opposition. You're going to have people criticizing you. And even, you could cure cancer. You could cure, all the disease or famine in the world, and they'd still find something to nitpick about. So I say just, let it go and move on with life. And for Sikh Dhaliwal, I say thank you very much for supporting and representing our great city in Ottawa, and thank you for representing the citizens of Canada to make it a better country for the future. Now, as we move on, Lawrence Bishnoi in jail in India. I bet you that he, along with us, never thought that he would become a fashion icon. And it turns out that this jacket that he was spotted in one of his arrest photos and perp walks has now become a huge, huge seller in India, and people are actually buying it like hotcakes. They've gone as far as selling them and having Lawrence's first name, just Lawrence, on the breast of the jacket, as you can see in this image here. It doesn't show up too well on the screen with this, but it's there. You can see it. And this came after more Instagram photos showed up of this pose or this perp walk, and all of a sudden they were in demand. Now, of course, we know if we look back at history, whether it is in pop culture in the US, there was a time where people thought Chicago Bulls represented gangs. There were bandanas, the red for the Bloods, the blue for the Crips. So it's always been something that drives fashion, because people like to feel like they are a bad boy or a bad girl. They want to feel like, they're intimidating, or, that they are on the cusp of something. And this just gives them that identity, whether or not it's fake or not, in terms of the identification as gang members or tough people or whatever. It is just the image, and that sells. We know that by shoes, we know that by clothing, we know that by jackets, and this is just another iteration. However, something we don't normally see is that people are being arrested for selling these jackets. There have been 3 men that were arrested here in this article that was from the Times of India. And they were basically being accused of promoting gangs, promoting criminality, promoting all of this negative stereotype by selling these jackets. So again, I think that, Bishnoi and the rest of the world never thought that he would be a fashion icon and influencing such a major trend. But again, we'll see how this plays out. It is just a fad. It'll pass just like everything else. And I think that the big issue here is that as they arrest people for selling these jackets and make a bigger deal out of it, then it's going to drive the demand. So it's actually going to have the opposite impact as to what they want. And that is to, of course, downplay this jacket. Let it go. Be silent, and it won't be such a big issue. But the more you make it seem as though this jacket represents something, such as the gang life, the criminality, the tough image, all of that, the more that you push that narrative, then the more people are going to want it, especially youth, because they want to rebel. They want to be seen as rebelling against society, against parents, against the norms, and this just gives validity to the jacket and what you're claiming that it represents. But I just thought that was interesting to see how the fashion is going there and how that's trending. Next up, we wanted to cover here in Canada, in the prairies. The Parliament, or sorry, the legislature is hosting a very unusual event, and that is the display and ability for the Sikh community to come out and see some major historical items and artifacts from the Sikh community. So let's take a look here. CTV News did a report on it, so this will give you a bit more information about it and what's going on in Saskatchewan. Sleepy little Saskatchewan, as we call it.
And their significance to the province's Sikh community.
A notable day for the Sikh community in Saskatchewan, with historic artifacts on display at the Legislative Building. It includes various decrees, also known as hukamnamas, from prominent Sikh leaders, as well as weapons used at various points throughout Sikh history.
These artifacts are used in the battlefields, like the sword given by Baba Banda Singh Bahadur to by Roopchand family in 17th century after conquering the Sirhind at that time.
Bhai Bhuta Singh Ji is the keeper of the artifacts and is the 13th descendant of the original custodian of the Guru's gift repository, beginning with the 6th Guru.
These artifacts are got a personal touch from our Sikh gurus, and these artifacts hold a really high respect in the hearts of Sikhs.
These are a few of 150 artifacts that Bhai Bhuta Singh Ji has to take care of, and these artifacts displayed today were relevant from the years of 1614 to 1710. According to Stats Canada, Sikhs make up 0.8% of Saskatchewan's population. Those in the community are grateful for having the chance to share their heritage in the Legislative Building, calling it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
If these artifacts are being showed at the Legislative Assembly, it shows the commitment of Government of Saskatchewan.
And to show our culture and to encourage our young generation to keep our history alive.
The artifacts will make a brief stop in Saskatoon before returning to India. Damien Smith, CTV News, Regina.
So I thought that was just an interesting perspective there in terms of the importance and significance, but also because it's in Saskatchewan, which, as they said in the story, the Sikh population is quite small in that province, representing about 0.0 or 0.8, I believe it was, percent of the population, so quite minimal. And to me, this really signifies a opportunity for the Parliament, for the government of Saskatchewan, to show that no matter how much of the population you represent, that each part of that population is equally important and that they're valued. And by having this real piece of history there, I think really goes on to solidify that reputation or that message out to the community. As they said, it will be heading on to Saskatoon, which is the other major city in Saskatchewan, before it all returns to India. So I thought, a nice, cheerful, happy story for the end of our week, Angus, to bring on, because so much we've been talking about violence and threats against people and all these different things. I thought we'd try to, finish up my reports this week with a bit more of a positive swing on it.
Yeah, and in fact, it's funny that you say that about being positive. That the reporter who was reporting on that, I did want to chuckle because he was the most miserable person. I thought, cheer up, mate. It's quite a nice story, this. And he appeared to be clearly suffering from a bit of winter sadness in his report. He could barely rate us.
And believe me, there's a lot to be sad about if you're stuck in Saskatchewan in winter.
I can well believe it. As we say here in the north of England, if he smiled, a donkey would die. But anyway, let's move on to... I particularly want to pick up the story about, was a couple of stories actually I wanted to make comments on. One is about the fashion one. I mean, there is obviously a serious element to this. This guy Bishnoi is quite a dangerous character, but it does show this sort of faddism and it remind me, certainly our generation, James, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but I remember as an 18-year-old student, I had a huge poster of Che Guevara on my wall. He was a Cuban revolutionary. But again, it was a fabulous piece of art, and certainly here in these countries, many students had on their wall this incredible portrait photo of Che Guevara. Now, I had absolutely no idea who Che Guevara was, but just this portrait was iconic. And I do urge our audience, if you want to know what I'm talking about, do just go Google it. It's everywhere. As I say, just about every 18-year-old in the UK had a picture of him on the wall. But who was Che Guevara? He was a Marxist revolutionary in Cuba at the time. I had absolutely no idea who he was. I didn't even know which country he lived in, just like the picture. And but he did represent this sort of sign of rebelliousness. It's revolutionary. I knew he was a revolutionary. That's all I knew about. Didn't know what he actually represented. Yeah. But the fashion, particularly amongst the youth, they are of course excited by the thought of rebelliousness. This is again, it's very male, usually a male thing. As you become a young adult, there is always that amongst many young men, this sort of feeling of rebelliousness. It's all about pushing your boundaries. It's just becoming a man at the end of the day. It's all driven by testosterone. But ultimately, you don't really know what like I didn't know what Che Guevara represented. He represented some really dangerous, extreme left-wing politics, Marxism. But I didn't know at the time. And likewise, there'll be youngsters out there buying these Lawrence jackets, thinking, "Hey, I'm cool, I'm rebellious." Actually, they don't realise what it represents. But ultimately, and again, the thought always strikes me with these sorts of things, and we've actually mentioned this before, is that master criminals, and I hesitate to use that word, master criminals, but basically they are very good at what they do. They make very good criminals. Now, Lawrence Bishnoi, I mean, he's not that great. He's spending his life in prison, which obviously is not great. But ultimately, he clearly had the ability, the talents, if that's the right word, to build a criminal empire. Not just a criminal empire, but a global criminal empire with his main client, the government of India. Now, if he'd actually turned his abilities, his talents to legal enterprise, and clearly he's entrepreneurial, he could actually, for example, in the fashion world, he could be selling his Lawrence line of jackets, and he could actually probably make an awful lot more money with his fashion empire. Again, I talk about how impressionable the young are. I mean, look at the trainers thing, which I've never quite understand. Sneakers, I think, as you call them in America. This whole sneakers thing, where kids will literally spend hundreds of dollars on a pair of sneakers. I mean, what's that about? But of course, it's getting the likes of Nike and whatever extremely rich. Well, Bishnoi has this capability, or has this opportunity to actually make an honest living, and a massive honest living, if he would turn his attention to legal entrepreneurship. And it's the same with many criminals, is that certainly those who rise to the cream of the crop, who rise to the top of the criminal world, they could actually make a good living if they did it legally, and probably, in fact, a better living if they actually turn their talents to legal enterprise. But sadly, anyway, that's just the way of the world. Most criminals are criminals because they don't have that talent. That they have they have a choice, but ultimately they're channeled into criminality because they can't make it in the legal world. But there are those at the top of the tree, like the Bishnois and many others, say master criminals, who could actually make very, very great, vast fortunes, be highly successful if they turn their talents to legal efforts. But anyway, that's another issue. And then the first story, this struck me about the Suk Dhaliwal, I think he was, this MP. And I think it's quite sad in many ways because, and I'm going to be talking about the right wing in Canada shortly, but we have, of course, the same issue here in Europe and in other nations where they make very easy targets. If their English is not good, and particularly this is very relevant to first-generation immigrants of whatever ethnicity, is generally speaking, your English is not going to be great. It takes decades to learn to speak good English. But what I would remind the Canadian audience is that this guy is a democratically elected representative. He has also achieved many things, of which you sort of referred to. But ultimately, he is a democratic representative. If you don't like it, tough. But a lot of people clearly do. And all I would say is judge him by his results. Clearly, he's doing a lot of good work. He's stood up for many good causes, and he is achieving great results. And he was elected democratically. If you don't like it, tough. Clearly a lot more people than you do like it. So that's it. And again, I'm going to talk about the right wing in Canada. Of course, a lot of it all comes back to racism, xenophobia, anti-immigration, all that sort of whole big bundle of issues. And again, it just struck me also with Canada. And it's the same to some degree in the USA. Canada, I watched a programme recently, I don't know if you get it over there, you probably don't, James, or our audience in other countries. It's called Race Across the World. And it's a simple concept. It's a television programme. So it's a very addictive television programme. They get a group of people, pairs, like brothers and sisters, best friends, mothers and daughters, whatever, and they start from point A, and have to get to point B, which is usually a very, very long way away, with minimal money. They're given the budget. They're not allowed to fly. They've got to.
Here in North America, it's called the Amazing Race.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, well, exactly. And they did it across Canada. A few series ago, they did one across Canada, and they started on the west coast, and they had to go all the way across to the east coast. And the checkpoints were up in the north, down the south, and they had to sort of zigzag their way across Canada. But the one thing that struck me, good heavens, how big Canada is. Nobody has a clue outside of Canada just how big Canada is. It is enormous. I mean, the amount of land, the amount of geography in Canada is absolutely mind-blowing. And the population of Canada, what is the population of Canada, James?
Oh, you're testing me now. It's about 35, 40 million.
Right, 35, 40, I mean, it's nothing. Our population here in the UK is double that, literally double that, in our tiny little island. So we do have an immigration issue and a space issue. But Canada is absolutely enormous with a tiny population. Surely, to the right-wing extremists or the racists, there's enough land in Canada to make, to make a space for these people coming in. It cannot surely be a big issue for you. But anyway, James, I diverge. But
the funny thing is, Angus, is that about 80% of the Canadian population lives within 150 to 200 kilometers of the U.S. border.
That's
so
interesting.
Really concentrate along the southern part of the country, and everything north is very barren.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful farmland, beautiful mountains, beautiful everything. But yeah, just saying that, for the majority of population, we live in metropolis areas along the Canada-U.S. border.
Yeah, and indeed that program, and I do urge our audience to watch it because it's a very addictive program. When they were travelling across some of the wilderness of Canada, again, it just makes people realise it's a bit like Russia. Russia's very the same. Enormous countries.
Yeah.
When you look at the map, you don't actually appreciate how big it is until you actually see people travelling literally for days and days and days in a car just to reach from what appears not very far on the map. But anyway, let's move on, Jez. I thought we were talking about that for ages. Right, let's move on and actually talking about Canada and the right wing of Canada. I'm going to talk about this is a gentleman, a podcaster that we have covered before. And he is a right wing, and I'd even go as far as to say as a right wing extremist. He's a podcaster, and the podcast itself is called the Elevate Podcast. And he's very not just anti-Khalistan, but he appears to be anti-Sikh and certainly anti-immigration. And thank you to one of our correspondents on email who sent me the link to this. Thank you. You know who you are. Much appreciated for this. And I was only going to share a short bit of it, but there's a couple. In fact, there's about 2.5 minutes of one of his recent. I think this was yesterday's video, and I have to say I was quite horrified about the things he was saying. Let me play this, and I'll stop it periodically sort of to talk about it. And of course, we've got no sound. Let me just start that again and get some sound working. Hear his dulcet tones. Right, and of course, he's referring to the recent referendum in Ottawa. And he doesn't want to make any sound at all. Okay, that's really not very helpful at all. All right.
Click on your screen there, Angus, and down at the bottom there on the menu bar there. As opposed to, on the actual image video itself.
Oh, no, that's, I think I've recorded this separately.
Okay.
No, for some reason, I don't know, that's really annoying that I've not got that. Basically, let me paraphrase what he was saying. He was talking about the Ottawa referendum, and he was saying, why on earth have we got these people parading on our streets? They're a danger. And he reiterates loads and loads of the old tropes. These are terrorists. And he talks about how he first came across these Khalistanis. And he said all they ever talk about is terrorism, is violence. And of course, he picks up on this kill Modi politics. Of course, this is the Sikhs for Justice referendum. And one of the phrases that Sikhs for Justice comes out with on a regular basis is kill Modi politics. Ballots, not bullets. Again, it's very deliberate rhetoric. It's actually very provocative rhetoric. It's designed to sort of almost sound like kill Modi politics, and it's right-wing idiots like this who pick up on it. And the thing that really, and it's a shame we don't have the audio on this, is he specifically says, and he then goes along this long diatribe about what the Sikh community represent, and particularly what the Khalistan community represent. They represent violence, they represent terrorism. And he goes on at great length about what a danger to Canadian society these people are. And is showing here the violence that occurred at the Ottawa referendum. Now, and ironically, the video is actually showing here, it's peaceful. There's a guy smiling there. I don't see much violence going on there. And they're all standing out there in the snow. And again, as we said yesterday, well done to everybody for turning out for such a great turnout. They're chanting. Of course they're chanting. It's part protest, but it's also, they're there for a very powerful political reason. And yet this guy, he just, in fact, it's a 20-minute podcast. He just spent 20 minutes just ripping apart the Khalistanis. And I mean, in legal terms, it's almost libelous, the stuff that he's talking about. And but ultimately, it represents what is essentially a right-wing extremist view. And unfortunately, this does represent quite a section of Canadian society. And we, of course, have it here in Europe as well. The right-wing extremists, they are a danger to not just the integration of the communities and social cohesion. And this is Panoon coming on in his interview, which again I'll talk about in a moment. It highlights that there is this section, this peripheral section of our society of extremists who look at these things and they turn it very quickly into the whipping up the hatred. And again, we've seen this particularly with the rising hate crimes. They're using very visible situations like this that are peaceful, that are perfectly peaceful democratic outpourings from communities and turning them into these divisive politics. Now, I'd hate to say that, and referring back to what I was just saying there, James, is that Canada is a big enough society, it is a big enough country, geographically speaking, that you can all live peacefully. And I'm not just pointing the finger at Canada, it's the same here in the UK and in all our other countries, is that there is enough space for these people. Now, of course, the immigration debate is a different one here in the UK because, of course, we are a small island, etc., etc. But ultimately, it's people like these on the peripheries that are now that are spreading their bile across social media. Now, I don't know if this guy is funded by Hindutva, but certainly what he's spouting actually parrots and mirrors a lot of the Hindutva propaganda that we see and hear about regularly. And talking of which, we had this interview. Gurpatan Singh Panoon was interviewed by CTV News. And one of the other things that podcast also referred to, he did refer to this interview as well, saying, why on earth have we got this guy? He represents a bunch of terrorists. They blew up Air India. Yes, again, the Kanishka bombing. Comes up again, and sadly, which the Indian propaganda machine have quite successfully in the mainstream managed to blame it on the Khalistan movement, where ultimately that is not an open and shut case, as we often refer to. It is quite likely it was an Indian intelligence operation, a false flag operation. Well, they've very successfully made the narrative that it was all Khalistanis, and likewise that podcaster comes up with the same old tired trope. Oh, it was these wretched Khalistanis that blew up one of our aeroplanes, over Canada. And anyway, so Gurpatan Singh Panoon was interviewed on CTV, and he actually had an opportunity. And in fact, sadly, we don't have the audio here because otherwise I would play it. But ultimately, he's just repeating everything that we talk about regularly, and he does actually repeat in every interview that he manages to do. And but one of unsurprisingly, the backlash, and again, we talk about the narrative and the mainstream narrative. Well, Hindutva have spent years and an awful lot of money in pushing their narrative, their anti-Sikh and anti-Khalistan narrative right across the diaspora, whether it's North America, whether it's in Europe, but particularly North America is a big target for Hindutva. Now, they have started to lose this propaganda war. It is very clear that the mainstream, and once again, this is more evidence that the mainstream is taking notice of the Khalistan movement. It is taking notice of the whole Sikh issues, all the Sikh issues that we talk about, because that people like Panoon is now being interviewed on a relatively regular basis on big channels, whether it's CTV or the US channels. He's getting a platform. And which means that these issues are getting broadcast to not just the Sikh community, but to a wider audience, and they are taking note of these things. Now, sadly, in this interview, he doesn't actually. The interviewer doesn't mention a lot of the issues that we want to talk about, but ultimately, Panoon gets his point across and gets it across quite powerfully. And but of course, Hindutva as soon as this was released, and you look across social media over the last few days, social media has been absolutely rammed full of the Hindutva, the Godi media, going in absolutely apoplectic rage, saying, how dare Canada interview Panoon? How on earth can they give a platform to this terrorist? You know, these people who blew up the Air India aeroplane. You know, how on earth can you talk to these people? So again, they realise that. They're losing. They are losing this propaganda war. They are losing this battle of control of the narrative, because now an alternative narrative is hitting the mainstream. It's easy for them in India. They've got a captured domestic audience. They control the entire message that the Indian people hear. They control the media in India, but they cannot control democratic media out in the West. Democratic media is allowed to put across a different viewpoint, and indeed they are, and generally speaking, the impartial media, even slightly partisan media, still tend to interview people from the opposite narrative just to try and at least gain some level of balance in the debate. And this is why Panoon and many other campaigners, whether it's a Sikh Federation or whoever, or the World Sikh Organisation, they're all getting platforms on these mainstream channels. They are able now to put across to the global audience, this is what India is about, this is what Hindutva is about. And just to wrap up this segment, there's some of the backlash came, of course, unsurprisingly, from the Godi media, again, right across Twitter and Facebook, etc. I mean, my Facebook this morning was full of Hindutva media trying to, again, in apoplectic rage about this interview. And first post, again, unsurprisingly, one of the Godi media picks up on this, says, "Kill India chants, flags desecrated, the Khalistan referendum held by Sikhs for justice in Canada." Again, the Indian tricolour was torn apart in that during that event. But of course, kill India politics. But again, the rhetoric has been, and again, it's a very deliberate tactic of Panoon, say kill India politics. But of course, it's easy ammunition for the Godi media, and they sort of fall into this propaganda trap where they say, "Oh, he's shouting kill India," and he say, "No, I'm not. It's kill India politics." That's what he always said. It's ballots, not bullets. And again, they're always falling into this very easy trap of accusing him of violence and terrorism. Well, no, it's not. In other words, you're just cherry picking his words. It's a bit like the BBC with Donald Trump, just on a side issue. Anyway, so the first post, like many, and referred to the referendum over the weekend, and they hated the fact that it was this hugely popular outpouring of democratic feeling pro-Khalistan. And there is an Indian reporter, Rupa Subramanyaya. She's very active on Twitter. She's a journalist, but she's also a Hindutva journalist. And she came on X. This is one of many examples, but this is a useful example, just to sort of highlight the points they're picking up. And she talks about political pandering in Canada to a special interest group. This is what it looks like, and how it corrodes a country. I don't think you'll find that democracy corrodes a country, Rupa. But anyway, she continues. So she talks about how the Panoon interview, which you've just seen. She claims that this is the guy who praised Hamas after October the 7th. And she shows further down on her feed this video of Panoon. Again, he wasn't praising Hamas. He was referring to the October the 7th incident, saying this is what happens when you oppress people, you get violence. Now, he didn't imply that the Khalistan movement would resort to violence. But what he did say is you've got to allow democracy to enact itself in the Punjab. That's really what the point is making. But of course, this reporter, it's a journalist. That's a questionable term. But anyway, this journalist tries to claim that he was claiming it was all about violence, and we want to rise up violently against India, which is definitely not what he was saying. He's also urged boycotts of Air India tied to his own threats, and she claimed CSIS and RCMP were investigating these threats in 2023. Yes, they were investigating. What did they find? Absolutely nothing. And actually, his threats against Air India, which again the Godi media said, he's threatening to blow up Air India again. And no, he wasn't. He was saying we should boycott Air India. Do not fly Air India. That's all he was saying. And yet somehow it was twisted into we need to bomb Air India. Again, it's absolute nonsense. And of course, she refers to the Air India bombing. That it was Khalistan. Again, it's regurgitating the old propaganda nonsense. And And she says, yet CTV News chose to platform Panoon without mentioning any of this. And well, it's because it's not true, half of it. And he treated him as an expert on the Canada-Indian trade. No, he was being interviewed to talk about issues that are relevant to the Khalistan community. So again, she twisting sort of the facts. Only in Canada do we see someone who has endorsed violent rhetoric treated as a legitimate commentator. No, only in Canada, a democratic nation, have they interviewed somebody with an opposing narrative to India. That's what impartial journalism is actually all about. If you don't like it, tough, but that's what we do in a democracy. So clearly she's struggling with that. And then the final point, the point is you don't need to like India Hindus or care about the Khalistan issue, but surely we can agree that a credible news organisation shouldn't platform someone who openly advocates violence against any group. Interesting comment, that interesting paragraph, because you as a journalist, young Rupa, is that absolutely, is that we can agree that a credible news organisation shouldn't platform someone who openly advocates violence against any group. You can turn that on India. We shouldn't platform anybody from India because they advocate violence. Narendra Modi actually stood up and publicly said, we will enter your homes and kill you, when he was leading up to the elections, to great cheers from his BJP supporters. So ultimately then we shouldn't platform Narendra Modi, who is ultimately behind a lot of this violence. We see no violence from the Khalistan movement. You show me any violence, any evidence of violence from the Khalistan movement in the last, decade or more or longer. There isn't any, but I can certainly point to plenty of terrorist violence from India. Hardeep Singh Nijjar, Avtar Singh Kanda, Gurpratap Singh Panoon himself, the subject of an assassination plot originating in India. So again, I mean, I'm preaching to the converted here, but anyway. So the Sikh Press Association, they actually responded to this, and they basically they picked apart her points very, very clearly. And Mark Carney, in fact, they do talk about the Carney situation and the Trudeau situation. Mark Carney is acting more like a bank teller, surrendering the security of Canadians. And in the interview, they say, despite not yet addressing India's death squads, in that interview, the question was, why didn't CTV actually bring up, you talked to Panoon, but why on earth didn't you bring up the real issues, like the death squads that have murdered, for example, Hardeep Singh Nijjar? So in an attempt to censor Sikh voices in the media, the National Post Hindutva reporter Rupa Subramanyaya is leading a campaign lying about a slogan displayed behind Panoon. Now, if you noticed in that interview, there was this slogan that says, na Hindi, na Hindutva, na Hindustan. Now, what that basically means is no Hindi language, no Hindutva, obviously no Hindustan, the Hindu Rashtra. As the Sikh Press Association says, it actually refers to Hindi being pushed right across India, despite the fact that over 60% of the population don't speak Hindi, is that the BJP government are trying to enforce, again, this is part of the Hindu Rashtra, this Hindu supremacy movement, they are trying to force the whole of India to all speak Hindi, despite the fact that the majority actually don't speak Hindi. We've certainly seen it in the Punjab, where the Punjabi language is deliberately trying to be driven out of schools and instead Hindi being imposed. But this isn't just in the Punjab, it's happening in Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Assam, beyond. So the four corners of India are subject to this. And in response to such oppression, as this says, Panoon and the team only advocated for ballot, not bullet, and more democracy in India, referring to the Khalistan referendum campaign that they run. Claims to the otherwise are attempts to stifle Canada's free press and censor Sikh voices critical of India's Hindutva regime. And as a final point on this, and Baz News actually did remind us the fact, actually, and again talking about the Carney-Trudeau comparison, how Trudeau was very representative of the Sikh community and anti-India in terms of highlighting the misbehaviour, as I call it euphemistically, of India. Basically, the illegal terrorism of India, let's call it for what it is that Carney has not done that. And Carney is trying to restart this relationship between Canada and India. But he was reminded back in May by a top official, he was advised that Canada should require a public commitment from India on accountability measures amid claims the country is behind a rash of criminal activity and murders. So months later, despite Canada saying India has agreed to more collaboration, it appears that no such public commitment has been secured, as anxiety turns to anger across Sikh communities over fears of violence and repression. So in other words, again, it comes back to the old trade deals versus human rights versus illegal terrorist activities by the Indian government. It again highlighting the fact that Carney was advised in May, you must secure some form of commitment from India that they will basically stop this transnational repression And only on that condition can we then move forward to talk about trade. That commitment has not been offered, and yet what is Carney doing? He is striding forward, setting up trade deals with India against all the advice of even his top advisors, against the advice of CSIS and indeed the RCMP, James.
That's exactly it, Angus. And for this to go forward, I mean, it is something that we need as a nation, because the longer that he prolongs it, and again, we have foreign interference and transnational repression claims, not only against India, but Eritrea, Russia, Iran, Israel. And for right now, the biggest one seems to be India, and they are classified as one of the biggest threats to Canada. The longer that Mark Carney goes on without holding the feet to the fire of Narendra Modi and his team, then the more that these other countries are feeling that they are enabled to get away with it and to continue this whole pattern of interference within our political system, the interference within our media, and of course the transnational repression against citizens of Canada on Canadian soil, and also others who happen to be in Canada that the India government is targeting, and that we need to stand up against. The longer Mark Carney goes against or goes without holding India to that public accountability, then the worse it's going to be, because they are just being empowered and they are continuing to activate, through the proxies such as the Bishnoi gang and other gangs that act at their behest in exchange for cash, in exchange for drugs, in exchange for guns that India is supplying or offering to supply in some of these situations, Angus.
And I'm going to, I've managed, just whilst you're talking there, James, for some reason I've got the sound back. I do want to play this, because if you really want your hackles to rise, listen to this guy.
A couple of weeks ago about how I first came into contact with these guys, and it was a similar story to that of this. They had a referendum vote in Calgary, a referendum vote in BC. You talk about how Punjab should separate from India, and then got very violent in their rhetoric in the streets, and was like, who the heck are these guys waving yellow flags? And then I started learning how gross and detestable these people really are, because they love violence, and they will use violence to shut up anyone who gets in their way, specifically those who are Hindu, who dislike what these guys are about. They will actually kill them.
So again, I just want to point that, I'll stop periodically through this. He's now claiming that Khalistanis are violent and they want to kill Hindus. Again, where is the evidence of this?
People like me who will speak about them and speak against them, they'll just call me racist to move on and use typical left-wing tactics to get me to shut up. Well, they'll try to...
Right, and this is an important point, because he's saying, look, I'm right-wing, and I'll only get pulled apart by left-wing do-gooders. Well, I hate to say this, mate, but you are a racist. I'm right-wing. I'm unapologetically right-wing. I'm right of centre. I'm not a right extremist. But I'm not a racist, evidently, obviously. So, in other words, this is nothing to do with party politics being left-wing or right-wing. This is just simple, basic, old-fashioned racism and hatred. That's really what this is about.
Just credit me for what I'm saying. Just call me some white guy who's just racist towards brown people, and well, if that you ever hear that, we'll direct them to this video, because we're going to get into the nuance of what this group really is all about. I've talked about them for a long, long time at this point. They are a group who claims to be Sikh, claims to hide behind a religion to use as a defense mechanism for their hateful ideology, which is they essentially want race supremacy. They essentially want to eliminate anyone who isn't Sikh.
So again, apparently the Khalistan movement is all about race supremacy. Again, I mean, obviously, again, I'm preaching to our converted audience. It's pretty obvious how wrong this is. But all this does is just highlights the utter sheer ignorance of this guy. This guy is slagging off on. He's got a huge following. He's got something like 180,000 subscribers, and these people are listening to this guy who might not know anything about the Khalistan movement, and they're now understanding that the Sikh people, not just the Khalistan movement, the Sikh religion is all about supremacy, racial supremacy. I mean, the irony drips large in this, but this is the sort of the nonsense that is coming out.
And they will use their religion as a shield to make sure no one can criticize them. So that's why they call themselves Sikhs for Justice, and use these types of words and terms to make sure that no one actually criticizes them, because including the CBC, who continues to run protection and cover for these guys who are fairly dangerous. So I'll show you what I mean. You had them here during the vote yesterday getting up and chanting, well, this. They use the left-wing ideology very well. They work in the gray, they work in semantics. So what they'll do is, you hear here, they're chanting "Kill Modi," "Kill India," but they say, "Oh, but politics." They make sure to add the politics at the end of it to make sure no one can say that they.
Again, you can see how he's fallen into this trap. He's just taken it at face value, not actually really understood what's being said there. But anyway,
are advocating for death of India and death to a leader of another country, but that's a semantic game they play. But they very much want these people dead.
So he's referring to semantics there, and he's saying they want these people dead. Well, unfortunately, this guy clearly, in all his ignorance, has never heard of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He's never actually got off his right-wing extremist backside and actually looked into and researched this whole story, what it's all about. He has absolutely no understanding, firstly, what the Khalistan movement actually genuinely represents. He has clearly absolutely no understanding of what Sikhs are and what they represent, and clearly he has absolutely no idea of what India have been up to and who actually has been doing the killing on the ground, James. So I'm glad I got the sound back on that, because again, when I watched this, and again, thank you to the correspondent who sent this through, I mean, I was absolutely, I have to say, I couldn't sit down. I was so angry with it.
Absolutely, and you can notice right away that he's got that tag there. He's sharing information from Bearson Media again that we talked about last night.
Yes, I meant to mention that. Yeah.
And this guy who shows up and tries to stir the pot at all of the different events. I assume that he's based in BC because he likes to show up. He likes to show up downtown at the consulate, get that on the 18th of every month, and try to put his spin on it. And again, he is just very commonplace, and he likes to twist things around, saying that he's been threatened and that people are violent and this and that, when it's the furthest from the truth. And there's been absolutely, when I've been there, I've never witnessed any violence or any intimidation towards him whatsoever at the events that we've both been at, that we've covered. So.
Indeed. So again, I'm rendered almost speechless when you watch the full interview of this, or his full podcast. You think just the ignorance in it. It should almost be illegal that somebody could sit there and spout all this nonsense. But ultimately, that's what freedom of speech is. I might not agree with him, but ultimately he has a right to platform his views, however wrong they may be. But anyway, all we can do is educate and inform and try and spread the truth up against. And again, we're up against Hindutva, but we're also up against these idiotic right-wing extremists who are absolutely clueless, unfortunately. And as I was saying, just to reiterate the point, this is nothing about right-wing, left-wing. This is just an ignorant idiot. I'm right-wing. I'm not racist. It is possible to be right-wing and hold views that, whatever. Anyway, it's a rabbit hole. Let's not go down. But ultimately, all we can do, James, is to keep informing the wider audience about the truth about what the Khalistan movement is and what the Sikh community is about. And as a final point, just on that, I would just like to remind this young pup that who the hell do you think fought for your freedom during 2 world wars? The freedom that you're now enjoying, sitting there with your microphone sat in front of your face, is that the Sikh community were actually out there fighting for your own very freedom, James.
Absolutely. And look at it this way, Angus. Here's one way to look at it, is that children are uneducated. They are learning when they're younger, and they haven't got world experience. They haven't got any real life experience, and they are afraid of the boogeyman under the bed that's never been there. They've never seen it, never heard it, never witnessed it, but they're convinced that there's a boogeyman under the bed. And I think that these guys, unlike the children that grow up and learn differently, these guys still are looking for the boogeyman under the bed that they're convinced are there, and yet they've never seen it, they've never heard it, they've never witnessed it. And yet they're still looking for that so-called boogeyman, so they've got someone to blame and focus their anger and their hatred or their bias or their racism. They want to focus these things and have their voice. they're welcome to have their voice, but it's not one that I want to listen to.
Yeah, and sadly, it is the politicians who quite often leverage that sort of fear to their own advantage as well. So, anyway, let's move on now to our huge comments column. Loads of comments. Thank you to our audience for all the comments that have poured in. Loads, actually. I have to rush through these because there are so many. Happy, one of our regulars, came in and again talking about the referendum. India now saying there's only 5% of Sikhs want Khalistan. Really? Again, we have a regular chuckle about this lie that it is supposedly a fringe element. But as you rightly say, Happy, the hundreds of thousands that came out to vote, even in the snow, are doing this for their freedom and the future of Punjab and Punjabis. And as you rightly say, India never shows how many people turn out to vote in these referendums or the actual numbers. They're all about lying and spreading misinformation. To which G. Singh Randhawa replies, "It's not true. But you are in agreement. Yeah, we all the Sikh community they should all take vote from all the Sikh community living around the world. Then it will be more than 50%, I'm sure. And actually, I suspect it will be an awful lot more than 50% there, James."
I agree with you, Angus. I think that you're probably looking at least 70% would be my guess anyway, 70 to 73%, I would say, because you're going to have some who are still within the fringes, or those who are, more looking at the national projection of India as opposed to the balkanization of it.
Yeah, and again, we always come back to why don't we hold this referendum in the Punjab? Let's really find out. Let's answer this question once and for all. We do know, of course, in the diaspora, the vast majority in the diaspora are definitely pro-Khalistan. You only need to see the turnouts for the referendum to get a feeling of that. But certainly, we believe it is the same in the Punjab, as evidenced by the fact that two pro-Khalistan candidates were elected to the Lok Sabha. Of course, Amritpal Singh being one of them, who's in jail. But ultimately, so we do know the sentiment in Punjab is overwhelmingly pro-Khalistan. That is why India are just too afraid to hold a referendum in the Punjab. And Hatbir also says, look, democracy is now dead in India. As indeed, the fact that not even holding a referendum implies that as well. The BJP, as we know, have infiltrated all the organisations, but they now control the judges, the judgments, policymakers, the election commissions under total BJP control. And you bring up this important point. Can we stop in India the use of electronic voting machines? Paper voting needs to return to India. This is a real danger. Digital voting machines are very easily open to abuse, and we have them in the West. We don't have them here in the UK. I think the US do have them as well. There is always accusations with these electronic voting machines that they are very open to hacking and therefore for abuse, James.
Absolutely, and I know that you see them in the federal levels, especially. But I think that we're getting away from them right now for the simple fact that they are open to the questions of abuse, of hacking, of influence by foreign nations. So again, I totally agree that the paper ballots, I think, are still more legitimate and more secure.
Yeah, much, much harder to fix in any election. And of course, we've had enough controversies in the United States about was it hanging chads in the old days with the Bush elections.
Right, I remember that.
And then of course the Trump claims that the election was stolen, etc. So it's hard enough in the West to try and ensure that elections are indeed legitimate. But you imagine in India, where of course the infrastructure is decades behind. And you put electronic voting machines in India, it's very likely that they will entirely be rigged. So a very, very important point that. And TC, again, talking about the referendum, is that the Patnaik, the Indian High Commissioner in Canada, he referred to the referendum as being farcical, but as TC says, but only in the eyes of the deluded and in denial. It is considered farcical. Why not hold a non-farcical referendum in Punjab then? Again, it's back to this argument, Jeff. Well, if you think it's so farcical, then hold a legitimate one in Punjab.
That's right. Yeah, it's a pretty simple solution. And, it just seems to be common sense, Angus.
It does indeed. Now, this is a concerning comment from Bobby Singh. At events in talking about the Punjab and at Chandigarh, at Punjab University, the protest is still going on. And Bobby Singh has said, look, the RSS are in Chandigarh now, or they're coming after Chandigarh. they're planning, he's warning that 50 battalions of paramilitary forces are moving to Punjab, the RSS paramilitary, and you're fearing that there is plans underway for another 1984-style operation to suppress any retaliation by the Punjabis to save Chandigarh. Now, we do know that amongst this whole protest movement that is still gaining momentum, more and more people are aligning with this movement. It is still growing in strength and power. It is actually turning into something really significant. And I understand that one of the elements to this protest isn't just about, it's not just about the governance of the University of Punjab and pushing back against central control of the RSS. It is also about regaining Chandigarh as the capital of Punjab. Chandigarh at the moment is a union capital. It sits adjacent to Haryana, etc. But Punjab wants its capital back. So the movement is now about let's reclaim Chandigarh. So Bobby Singh is warning that potentially he believes paramilitaries are marching upon Chandigarh to essentially to push back Punjabis. Now, I've asked around. I've got no corroborating evidence towards this. I've got nobody else on the ground seems to know anything about this. Who knows, James? But certainly amongst our audience, if you know more about this, please let us know if there is any truth in this, because it is quite concerning if it is true.
It is absolutely concerning if there is truth behind it. Personally, I don't think that we would see another 1984 for the simple fact that media is just too easy to disseminate or to distribute across the globe, whether that's through cell phones or what. We know that India is not above cutting off the internet and communications, but there's still ways that it will get out, and I just don't see it going to the extreme level that did. At the Golden Temple in 1984. Yeah. I just don't see it going that far, and I hope that I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I would slightly, I think I probably on the whole agree with you, but what I would say in the same breath is that we do know that they are losing the battle. The RSS is losing this information war. They're losing the narrative control, etc. They are resorting to increasingly desperate tactics. They're realising the Khalistan movement is becoming so powerful it is likely that it is going to happen in the foreseeable future. So who knows how desperate they have become. You know, we had the Pahalgam attack, which has been accused as a false flag. Maybe they're planning something even worse. Let's certainly hope not. Anyway, third day in a row, James. Critics Corner. I'm delighted to say Critics Corner is back. How about this? AI rocks. Well done, AI rocks, for your comment. I mean, it's an absolute nonsense comment, but it's great to see Critics Corner come back with a vengeance. Canadians must watch real videos of the druggists and the terrorists. Of course, he's referring, well, say he, it might be she, or it might even be AI, but certainly this person is referring to this nonsense claim that the Khalistan movement is basically a movement that is all about drug running and terrorism. How they celebrate terrorism to run the business. They hate Canada. No, they don't, I think you'll find. And its value, and only interested in running their illegal business using the name of Khalistan. Stay away from these terrorists who may explode any time, James. Good heavens, there's a warning.
Oh, well, I could pick that apart till the sun comes up here on the West, Angus, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to say that ignorance shows all types of comments. It's probably derivative of certain AI components or research, but at the end of the day, I mean, you know, they've fought in world wars. They are practicing Seva. They are always out there when there's need. So, yeah, I just think this comment is so far off base.
It is. I mean, it's complete nonsense. But as I say, ironically, we completely endorse the existence of these comments because it's all about free speech. We don't run away like India does from anybody holding us to account. And feel free to hold us to account. We will always argue back if we feel we're in the right. If we're in the wrong, we'll certainly acknowledge it. But certainly comments like this, I mean, thank you for your comment. Much appreciated, but we entirely disagree with it. So, but as we always say, we will fight to always ensure your right and freedom to make such comments. And the final set kicks us off with Surjit Kondal, who says, nice to see you both. God bless you. Oh, and likewise, as we always do, James, we'd like to turn it back on to our audience. We couldn't do the show without you. It's lovely to see you guys virtually speaking. It's certainly lovely to hear from you guys in the comments column. And God bless all of them, James, all our audience who keep us going.
Absolutely. And don't forget to share with your friends and that, because as we say often, with being shadow banned, it makes it harder for us to reach a wider audience. But with your help, we can make it more common for people to be finding us and watching us.
And ASTEA says, thank you, James and Angus. You gentlemen are making a great difference. Keep it up. I don't know, actually. I put up this comment because it'd be interesting to see, do we make a difference with our small little corner of the world, with our sort of small voices shouting out about Khalistan? Do we make a difference? I actually think we do in our own small way, because it is all about combining all the small voices. I often talk about grassroots activism. Your single voices, all of us combined, do combine into a chorus that becomes a clamour, that becomes a pressure upon the politicians. So the more of us that are doing this, the more effective it becomes. Certainly, I don't know if we're making a great difference, but certainly we are making our contribution, I hope, James.
Well, and it seems to be that we pissed off India in the process and Modi because they've shadow banned us. So we've got to be doing something right, Angus.
As they say, the flak is always heaviest out when you're over the target. So hopefully we are over that target.
Right.
And Mastan Singh Dulai is my fluent Punjabi, is coming along in leaps and bounds. Mastan Singh Dulai says, the solution to all problems is an independent Khalistan, to which Free United Punjab and Saqib Kriaz respond, Khalistan Zindabad, James. I couldn't disagree.
Absolutely, and that is one of our favorite ways to end the show, because it is just so on point.
It is indeed, and that is indeed the best way to end the show. Khalistan Zindabad, as always. Thanks so much to all our audience for all the comments that you've been sending in. Please do keep them coming. Do let us know stories that you think we should be covering, or any snippets or rumours that you hear about that we can then do a bit of digging to try and find out what's going on out there on the ground, certainly in the Punjab. Don't forget, you can of course message us directly at message@satlugetv.com if there's any you'd like to bring to our attention, as many of you have been doing. Thank you very much indeed for that. But that is it for another day, and indeed another week. Do watch out for my podcast that will be uploaded tomorrow with Dr. Greywell, a fascinating one comparing the rise of Hindutva to the rise of Nazism. It's fascinating stuff, and the evidence is quite concerning, so do watch out for that. But in the meantime, it is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have of course been watching Perspectives. We will see you next week.